Good evening. You must all be feeling pretty tired by now. Welcome to the launch of the COP26 Catalyst Call to Action in the UK Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow. My name's James Correa. I'm one of the programme directors at Wilton Park, which has been running the secretariat for the Catalyst. What do you think of when you hear the words capacity building? Do your eyes glaze over ever so slightly? If they do, you would be forgiven, because I think for far too long, capacity building has been thought of as something that's, for a few technocrats and officials, maybe not something for most people to concern themselves with. And over the course of this session, if we do one thing by the time you leave here, we hope to have thoroughly put paid to that notion. We want to really strongly make the link between capacity building and ambition under the Paris Agreement. So I'll tell you a little bit about the shape of the session in a moment, but we wanted to lead off right from the top by hearing some of the words of the partners' call to action themselves. So I'm pleased to introduce Yamikani Idris. Yamikani is a negotiator from Malawi. Malawi has been a leading player in the Catalyst process over the last few months. We're going to hear a bit from Yamikani personally later on in the session. He's been a lead player in the transparency and reporting strand of the Catalyst initiative. But to start with, Yamikani is simply going to read the headline summary from the call to action itself. So please, Yamikani.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and delegates. It's a pleasure to be here on this very important occasion where we are discussing issues to do with capacity building. Indeed, capacity building cannot be overemphasized, as mentioned by James. So I will read the call of action, specifically calling everyone else here and indeed different key players to do action, specifically on capacity building. So we recognize that Paris Agreement provides us truly a global framework for climate ambition and action, but we can only keep its goals within reach if all countries fully able to play a part. At present, many countries still lack the resources, skills, and institutional capacity they need to achieve full participation of the Paris Agreement. So throughout the COP26 Catalyst Consultations, we have heard many inspiring examples of innovations as well as collaborations around capacity building programs around the world. But it's imperative that we scale up support of such initiatives as quickly as possible. We call for urgent transformational change in the way that capacity building and financial support for action is designed and implemented. Donors need to better coordinate each other to create complementary programming and to remove barriers to the entry by streamlining the processes of accessing the support. Support must move from project-based to programmatic approaches and take a longer-term perspective. Through capacity building, fosters the expertise in country. We know that one of the challenges faced by developing countries, they fly in and fly out of consultants. So we foresee that real capacity building will provide or enrich the expertise in country and also is responsive to local needs and builds lasting institutional capacity. It takes whole society approach and helps to build the political will to mainstream climate action and Paris Agreement compliance across all that we do. To achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we ensure that no one is left behind, and indeed stepping up the pace, quality, and scale of capacity building would show the world that we are serious in both endeavors. So with such, the Catalyst indeed have 4 calls of action, which I'm going to quickly go through them. The first call to action is that we all take a long-term perspective that adapts to local context. That's the first one, and it's very important that, one, we respond to the local needs. And also we provide long-term support to that capacity building, not once-off workshops and the like. So we need the long-term support to build the capacity building. Now, the second call to action is to ensure national leadership sets the agenda for climate action. So this capacity building should start at national level. And this should start by taking a whole society approach at national level and build sustained political will to build capacity. And at the same, we need to mainstream climate capacity across development planning at national level. And the third call to action is to support peer-to-peer learning and knowledge exchange. We understand that we have divergent experiences, and it will be important to facilitate the peer-to-peer sharing of knowledge and exchange. So under this call of action, we need to increase support for knowledge exchange and also enable collective conversations. On the fourth, which is the last call for action, is to transform approaches and improve coordination. This starts with improved donor coordination. Donors implementing various capacity building initiatives in country have to be well coordinated so that the capacity building provided should be as effective as possible. And on the same, we are calling for simplified processes for access to capacity building. So capacity building should be provided as easy as possible because it's the only way we are going to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. Under the same action, we are calling to conduct continuous learning, monitoring, and evaluation, where we should be able to learn from what we are doing and improve wherever possible. And finally, to build donor capacities. So the capacity is not only to the implementers, but the donors also have to encourage and indeed increase their capacities to provide capacity building. So basically, those are the 4 call to actions, and we will, throughout this session, discuss further the recommendations from the Catalyst action groups which are here. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Yamikani. And as I said, we'll hear a bit more from Yamikani later on. So the UK has been really determined. As soon as the UK presidency was announced, the UK has been determined to help break capacity building out of the silo that I was talking about earlier on. And one person who has been tirelessly globetrotting both virtually and physically for the last 2 years that the UK has been preparing the presidency is Nick Bridge, who is the UK Foreign Secretary's Special Representative on Climate Change. Delighted to have you with us, Nick, and we'd love to hear your thoughts to open our session. Please, as you like.
Well, thank you so much, Yamikani, and I can be brief because you've really set out fantastically well what we're here for. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm almost entirely focused on negotiations, but definitely was not going to miss this one. This is really close to my heart on the whole agenda, and I was also. You're bringing back memories, James, of when the UK bid for and were presented with the responsibility of COP26. Seems a long time ago, and it's been a very remarkable period of time. And I just have to say the way that Wilton Park has come alongside us as a presidency and supported us in very important ways. Has been, an extraordinarily welcome support. And also, just even in this room, the representation and the knowledge the diversity of voices. I look forward to a debate, although I do have to apologise because I literally have to go off to the loss and damage discussions, which I'm leading in a few minutes, and I hope you'll forgive me for doing that work, which will take me away. I think that the PCCB and the UNFCCC and all the partners have done a remarkable job. I mean, it's easy, I think, in this event to, keeping pushing, including with our cover decision, our draft cover decision the night before last, to just relentlessly talk about the balance and the ambition. And I think of how far we've come on adaptation as an absolutely central thing alongside mitigation, and then the finance to achieve that adaptation. And that has been a real success, but it's been driven, as you all know so well, by just how quickly the impacts have accelerated everywhere, always though, particularly in the poorest and most vulnerable countries. And many of you knew this was the reality. We knew the way things were going. People have been living with this reality for many years, but it's really obviously accelerated in the last couple of years very visibly, and it's sparked a wider consciousness across the world. I think one of the sort of also big trends that I've felt and observed in the last couple of years, with great relief, because before there was immense frustration, was the way that the major agendas of the world were being dealt with in these silos. Climate change over here, and environmental concerns over here, other aspects of the SDGs somewhere else. And we've managed, to some extent, with the presidency, to bring forward nature and the environment into the presidency whilst respecting the terms of the Paris Agreement. And I think it's been immensely important, particularly for this discussion, to think about all those challenges of those sustainable development goals holistically, and where the climate change risks have now come from and emerged and are now a reality for so many communities that were already tackling multiple challenges of development, whether in water or food security, all aspects of livelihoods. And we mustn't forget that as we give all this attention to mitigating emissions and adapting to climate change and providing the finance at all levels, it's part of what was already a hugely dynamic and challenging development agenda. And it's getting harder and harder, not easier and easier, because of the way the impacts are accelerating. So I think that context for me is very important. We've had the 4 action groups that I know I need to sort of flag. Number 1, adaptation action. Number 2, access to finance. Number 3, carbon market participation. And number 4, transparency and reporting. And I know, including through the UN regional climate weeks, and in huge array of consultations with the UN parties and with the action groups, there's been an incredibly important set of conversations, and we're going to go through those in the rest of the session. I think in terms of also sitting in a government where we have doubled our we've doubled our overall international climate finance. And within that, we've committed to that 50-50 split of adaptation and mitigation. Overall, in the wider budget, we've had our regrettable reduction temporarily due to COVID, which we need to acknowledge and is very challenging. But overall, within that, the climate budget is protected and growing. But of course, the feedback that we've always had, but we get it more and more now, is, often from communities that say, but these big chunks of money, we're not seeing that money, or we're not sure how to access it, or we don't have the capacity to access it, or it's not integrated, it's coming from many different places now. And so I just want to say, that from the sort of macro level, sitting usually in London and talking about the big picture Paris Agreement, the mitigation, adaptation, finance, the balance, and the huge elevation in ambition that we're trying to achieve, the reality then, comes down to this session and this discussion as to how it's being spent, how it's being accessed, and whether we're truly being responsible about empowering and supporting and really fundamentally changing our approach and our mindset as to how to make a difference, because we don't have time to get this wrong as we've got it wrong, in many different aspects in the past. So thank you very much to everybody. Look forward to this session, but also just to the UK government, continuing this journey. Sometimes after COPs, the presidency's visibility and role can fall away, and then we wait another year. That will not happen with this presidency. We are absolutely determined. I mean, we've set for us the highest possible ambition. We're trying to pull parties together until this point. Now, and I'll just say something which I think is a point of debate for some colleagues. But when we started this journey, we did have less than a quarter of the world committing to a net zero trajectory. We now have 90% of the world's economy committed. But that we know is just the beginning. That net zero means nothing if the net is too big, or if it doesn't actually result in then bringing forward a 2030 number that really is on aligned pathway with that long-term commitment. It doesn't mean anything if there aren't the policies in place. So I do, though, think we needed that target, and we needed that commitment, and we needed to build the broad coalition. But the reason I'm saying that is because it all works back from there. This is just the beginning at a time when we don't have very much time to build out those policies and make sure at the local level, community level, they're working. So I hope that we bring our contribution to this debate as it goes forward. Thank you very much indeed.
That's great. Thanks so much, Nick. And you've echoed, I think, so many of the key points from the call to action, particularly that point about whole of society approach, mainstreaming this, understanding the co-benefits across all that we do, all of our development plans, all of our economic plans, and so on. That's brilliant. So you've also provided a perfect segue, actually, in all that you said about adaptation and access to finance to our next speaker. So as Nick said, the structure of the Catalyst has been such that it's been divided into 4 major thematic threads, one of which is access to finance, and one of the key players in the access to finance thread of the Catalyst work has been the Adaptation Fund. So I'm delighted to introduce its chair now, and Matthias Broman. Keen to hear your opening thoughts, please, Matthias.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be here on behalf of the Adaptation Fund, and would like to start by thanking the UK COP26 Presidency for its leadership in advancing the work of access to finance and using its convening power to mobilize partners under the COP26 Catalyst for climate action. And I also would like to thank the Presidency for inviting the Adaptation Fund to join the Access to Finance Action Group with the important role to develop proposals for practical solutions and systematic changes to support capacity for access to finance. The Adaptation Fund is a nimble, accessible and effective vehicle for supporting countries and communities who are most vulnerable to climate change. With its focus on concrete adaptation action, the fund has been delivering effective programs to the most vulnerable with over $850 million portfolio covering over 100 countries in the world so far. Of those, 33 are least developed countries and 19 are small island developing states. And the fund was launched in 2001, created in 2001 and launched in 2007. So there is a history of the fund already in adaptation, which we are obviously building on when we are entering things as we are talking about today. While the core of the work remains its support for concrete adaptation projects for the most vulnerable, we also strongly believe in capacity building as a prerequisite for sustained and long-term access to climate finance. And this support is done through our readiness programs, accreditation, which unfortunately takes time, but once you have gone through it, you're much more ready for implementing adaptation projects, and our overall program and project support. With the rich experience that we have from these years, 10 years more or less, the Adaptation Fund is committed to helping developing countries improve access to climate finance for adaptation. The COP26 Catalyst Call for transformational capacity building that we are launching today represents actually a key milestone for a stronger, bigger, and more simple access to climate finance for adaptation. The challenges identified by the action group and the proposed actions address the key issues by vulnerable countries in relation to climate finance. And we heard them being spelled out here recently. And I would say that these actions are actually fully aligned with the fund's medium-term strategy that we have since a few years, which calls for greater access to finance for adaptation. We also have a cross-cutting theme within the fund of strengthening long-term institutional and technical capacity for effective adaptation, which has helped us to strengthen the capacity of our partners to advance the adaptation action on the ground. And for all these reasons that I've said, I would like to confirm that the Adaptation Fund fully endorses the COP26 call to action for transformational capacity building and remain available to further engage with all partners involved in advancing this work. And let me thank again the UK COP26 Presidency and all partners involved in this important work and the strong partnership and consultations over the last few months. And we remain committed to work with all partners and improving this work ahead. Thank you.
Many thanks, Matthias, and we really appreciate your offer there at the end to remain engaged. We're hearing all the time from partners that we've hardly begun, so I'm sure we will take you up on that offer in the months to come. So, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to pass straight over to my fellow Wilton Park Programme Director, Nancy Lee. Nancy and I are going to do a bit of a tag team. We're going to swap between ourselves as we now do a whistle-stop tour of those 4 themes that Nick read out earlier on. We're going to give you a little taste, just for about 10 minutes or so, for each of those, of the recommendations for each of the 4 themes that you see on the screen here. And then after that, we'll enter into a slightly wider conversation. We'll end with a slightly wider conversation about capacity building and how to step up the pace, the scale, the focus of capacity building efforts. So over to you, Nancy.
Great. Thank you very much, James. And again, thank you to Matthias and to the Adaptation Fund and to all of those who've been on our action groups. So, as has been mentioned, this call to action has come as a result of the various recommendations. It's a consolidation and the high-level thematic commonalities across those recommendations. So we're going to start first with the group on adaptation. So this action group has been focusing on the challenges faced by developing countries in their development of the adaptation communications, or ADCOMs. So I have the pleasure of welcoming to the stage Anju Sharma, who is a lead for locally led adaptation action for the Global Centre for Adaptation, who's going to talk through the recommendations for the Adaptation Communications Group. Thank you, Anju.
Thanks, Nancy. I think that works. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so as Nancy said, we had a fantastic group of people looking at capacity building for adaptation communications. We had a team with, country representatives who were actually working on adaptation communications, others who had a global view, a regional view. We had the regional climate weeks as well, where we had a lot of feedback. And when we started off, we thought, this is a small task in adaptation communication. It takes a consultant. And in fact, that was the approach that a lot of countries were taking, that they would usually be a consultant, an external consultant, sitting in a ministry, writing the report, trying to source information from different sources, so to speak. But as we talked about it, we realized that an adaptation communication is only going to be as good as the information it contains. And to get that information, you do need the process to back it. So, and while it may not make sense to invest in that sort of capacity just for the adaptation communications, it definitely makes sense to invest in that sort of capacity for adaptation in general, and for the other reports that will be required under the UNFCCC, whether that's the national adaptation plans or the biennial transparency reports that countries are going to have to submit. So it was actually quite a coincidence that all the groups came up with very similar recommendations, and ours echoed very much what Yamikani said, that on the one hand, you've got to take the longer term view on this. This is not a one-off report, and each time you try to get that one consultant, you've got to build the capacity to generate these reports over a longer period of time. The second one was that you've got to work with the other sectors, because we heard the frustration of those consultants that were trying to source information from different sectors who had no idea of what was required for them. So it's for these other sectors not just to understand what the impacts are going to be on their sector, but also the ability to engage with their own stakeholders and source that information back. And then finally, that you need to go deeper, that it can't just be a national level report. You've got to be able to source what's going on locally and bring that information up to the adaptation communications. So really what we saw was that national governments in particular have to see this as a long run. You've got, a process is now set in place under the Paris Agreement where you're going to have to report. National adaptation plans have to be made. Implementation has to be done. So the adaptation communications have to very much be part of this process and not just a report that's to be submitted globally. And national governments really have to be convinced that this communication is going to work for them, that it's going to, be added value for the national process. So it first has to serve that purpose, because otherwise it's quite meaningless. So I'll stop there, but just to say we very much second what Yamikani said in the first place. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much for your comments there, Anju. And then just picking up on that final point that you made around the need for this adaptation communications to work locally and to hear what is happening locally on the ground. We have a video message now from Shanaz Musa, who is another member of the Action Group, who is a lead finance hub in the South-South-North from the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. So if we can move to the video message from Shanaz.
Greetings from Cape Town, South Africa. I'm Shanaz Musa, Director of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. It has been a great honor to be involved in the process that has led up to the development of these recommendations. As an organization based in the majority world and delivering capacity building across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, it has become apparent that no intervention will be sustainable if not responding to a clear demand and where there is regional, country, and local ownership. Against this background, I would like to support what Anju has presented and reiterate the need for a coherent and inclusive approach to capacity development when it comes to adaptation communications. It is essential to understand and support the demand for capacity development and realize that it is an iterative, adaptive process, often requiring long time frames to ensure it is grounded. The capacity needs to be in place to not only develop the ADCOMs, but to be aware of what is needed to put into action any recommendations. Without this, we will once again be caught up in the cycle of communication for the sake of communicating, with no clear path towards implementation of these climate actions. And of course, finance needs to be easily available to support the capacity development processes. With that, I would like to wish you a productive time at COP and leave you with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. The future depends on what you do today.
And thank you to Shanaz for those words. And the future depends on what we do today. So a question to you all, what can we do, thinking about this as a whole of society approach, to improve transformational capacity building? So thank you to Shanaz. I think we have quick time for quick questions. Any questions on the adaptation recommendations from the audience before we move to our next group? No? Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. We were then going to move to access to finance. Unfortunately, Matthias Frimier, who is the head of delegation for Sweden, is caught up in the finance negotiations. So I'm going to ask whether Isabel, who I know is in the audience, would like to say a few quick words, but I am going to ask then if Bertha might be able to step in his place. But Isabel, do you? Okay, thank you. But just to say a huge thanks to the government of Sweden, both for taking part, but also championing the recommendations and the call to action and being that donor voice. So we very much appreciate your contributions to the action group. I am going to ask Bertha, if she doesn't mind, very sorry, short notice, but appreciating that we are in, if you can come and join me here, stay there, it's okay. We are moving, no, it's actually fine, thank you, in the middle of negotiations, and I think very much intense time in the finance negotiations. So thanks to Bertha for stepping in very short notice. But Bertha was very much involved in the writing or pulling together of these recommendations from the Access to Finance group and bringing together the diverse perspectives from the different stakeholders we had around the table. So Bertha, a few comments from you with regards to the call to action and then the specifics that have come out of the recommendations which make that call to action practicable and implementable. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Nancy, and sorry for being a little bit unprepared, but you caught me a bit by surprise. So I'm just gonna go back to what Andrew already said, which is that many of the challenges that were faced by the different action groups were very similar, and therefore the call for action comes from these similar challenges that were faced by all the groups, and that cut across topics and go very much beyond to the heart of the principles of capacity building. In a way that it's really transformative and sustainable. So I think you could see that in the call to action, the idea of implementing this transformative and sustainable capacity building across topics. But then we also had, obviously, our work as action groups, and that was more focused on the different topics that everyone had to work on. In our case, the Access to Finance action group came out with 10 recommendations that can be grouped, I would say, across certain big, broad topics. The first one is obviously that we already know we have principles. We've had principles on how to implement transformative, sustainable capacity building for quite some time. But I think one of the challenges that we've realized that we're still facing is that those principles are not always turned into action. And the first recommendation very much goes to the heart of that. It's about how to really turn these principles into actionable steps that can be addressed from both the providers and the recipient side to build capacity for access to finance. Other than that, and going back very much to the idea of principles, obviously there's also one of the principles of building transformative capacity building speaks very much to the topic of coordination. And and coordinating not only the provision but also the from the recipient side and across those two steps. So basically, one of our recommendations goes to very much trying to develop initiatives that could match those that need capacity with those that supply capacity, because we know there's plenty of initiatives for capacity building out there, but all of these initiatives are not well coordinated and they don't really speak to the needs necessarily of developing countries. And so that kind of, we call it a mechanism. We still, you know, the exact shape of it is still very much to be defined, is one of our recommendations. Also, we spoke very much about mainstreaming climate finance and how, or climate in general, sorry, and how that can be done through capacity building. And in terms of mainstreaming, we saw two ways of mainstreaming climate that would require capacity building. One is from the side of the providers, and we focused very much on the multilateral development banks, who have made commitments to mainstreaming climate finance, but are still a bit far from actually implementing those commitments fully. And so they still require capacity in the sense of not only developing the tools, which I'm sure they're very good at, but also on the tailoring those tools to the actual needs and realities of developing countries. And for that, we do think they very much still need capacity. On the other hand, we also looked for mainstreaming capacity at the national level, mainstreaming climate change at the national level by looking at the budgeting and planning processes of the developing countries, and that's still also an area that requires capacity building. I don't know if this moves. If not, I can go on, but I mean, ideally, I think there's more. Not. Then, just to go quickly through that, obviously, one of the main things we really wanted to focus on is the issue of the brain drain. I think that was a big concern for everyone, and for that, and this again goes back to principles we already know exist, but they haven't been properly implemented, to idea that capacity building cannot focus on the individual level, which is very much what happens when we have these workshops and these trainings. We focus on the individual, but instead of focusing very much on what we know is actually transformative, which is the institution and the enabling environments. And therefore, the brain drain, when we speak about brain drain, we think about building up the capacities of the local institutions that are able to build capacity in a sustainable way, whether this is universities, training centers in the proper countries, and even regional centers to bring together countries that have similar issues. And basically, we spoke, to jump to the last one, and this cuts across what I've been talking about a lot before as well, we think that providers of finance also need capacity. I think they still need to build capacity to understand the needs of developing countries and to tailor their modalities of access and their criteria for access towards the actual realities on the ground. Because what we hear is that access is a big problem because there's these huge barriers and this huge need for capacity. And I think it was Andrew that suggested that the best way to build capacity is to reduce the need for capacity. And so if you have these complex systems of criteria and modalities that everyone needs to learn, that this fund requires this and this other fund requires that, then you'll never end with the needs for capacity. So if you simplify all of that and you teach providers how to actually tailor their modalities to the realities of the people they're supposed to be serving, then you reduce drastically the need for capacity, and that's a very good way, we think, of building capacity more sustainable, or at least requiring less of it. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I think there's a video coming up, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertha, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for stepping in, literally. I just told her then, as I picked up the message from Matthias. So thank you so much for stepping in. And again, on the point that you just left off with, so this is about addressing the challenges where they are, and that is in the countries, in the climate vulnerable countries who need the access to finance most. And we have now a video message from Vanessa Vetoru, who is the Development Program Manager from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management from the Government of the Cook Islands. The Cook Islands weren't able to send a delegation to Glasgow this year, so I think it's very important that we're able to hear their voice. So turning now to the message from Vanessa. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Tessa Vaitoru and I'm from the Cook Islands, which is a tiny country located in the Moana Nui or Kiva, also known as the Pacific Ocean. Today I'm here to amplify the recommendations of the Access to Finance Action Group and why these recommendations matter to countries like mine. We are currently all being impacted by climate change, all of us, and we can adapt. But in order to do that, we need equal and meaningful access to finance. We need to improve the coordination for the implementation of transformative capacity building processes. We need to collaborate and promote the processes of climate mainstreaming in MDB programs and projects, budgeting, governance and planning structures. And most importantly, we need to promote peer learning in order to build our capacity and capabilities to meet our climate action targets. Me take korereka e kia manuia.
So thank you to Tessa and to Bertha. Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? We've got two here. Do we have a roving mic at all? Otherwise, I'll pass. Sorry, here's one. Thank you. If you can just introduce yourself, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My name is Renir Dandaishimiye. I am head of Department Environment and Climate Change in Burundi, and I am a negotiator on capacity building representing the African region. I am a member of PCCB also. My question or comment on this finance access is one. Sometimes there are, one hand, let's say, finance access is really a key issue. And I appreciate that it was identified as one of the key issues of our countries. Sometimes there is co-financing of projects, and it becomes difficult. One per USA by 3 USD or one per 4 USD, depending on some financing mechanism. Regarding co-financing, we have problem of equipment, technologies, infrastructures, electricity, water access supply. By the end, we have the problem of access to education and health centers. It became difficult to it brings all the problem. And by the end, by the final end, the development access becomes difficult. And as our country is looking for management of the risk and disaster, and by the end, the loss and damage. So I think the access to finance become a key issue regarding our countries. So the other comments I can provide is regarding the donors. When we say to bring donors or providers, who is it? Priorities, who is it? Who is secondary? Who is it? Is to bring all of us together. For one hand is better, but for another hand is confusion. Who is? We are under the climate change negotiation. We are among us parties. We have developed countries, and we have developing countries. We have African countries, which is very, very vulnerable, and other countries vulnerable. So who is the best to provide this financing? Really, if we say donors, providers, it's confusion to us. For one hand, it brings all of us who is able to do, and by the end, it gives us the confusion. Thank you so much. Maybe, excuse me, my English is not very better. I am French, sorry for that. Thank you for the work done. Is really better for this UK Catalyst Climate Action. I appreciate all the work done, but regarding the finance, we have really problems or access to finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we hope that the call for the better access to finance is heard. But just on your point about, who are the providers and can we bring them together? One of the specific recommendations that came out of the action group was to bring together those different providers of finance. It's not just the climate funds, it's the bilaterals, it's the private funders, and then to bring them together with those who are wanting to access that finance. So that is one of the specific recommendations. as to the next steps as to how that can happen is the conversation to follow up. So thank you for raising that. I think there was one or two other hands that had come up as well, if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Barry Gardner. I'm a Member of Parliament in the UK, and I chair the UK Climate Parliament. My question was really to Nick Bridge, but he's gone. So I don't know who else might be able to answer it. But Nick mentioned in his speech how the UK had cut its development aid budget this year, which has been a substantial blow, he said. What I wanted to ask was, given that the UK has received $27.5 billion in SDRs from the IMF allocation, why couldn't some of that actually make up the couple of billion shortfall?
Good question.
That's a good question. I don't know whether there's anyone in the room who is able to answer that question. Anyone? No? Thank you for raising it, Barry.
Well, it was really more a statement, but it was dressed up as a question.
But ask it in Parliament as well.
Oh, yeah. Great. I think on that note, we need to move on to the next group, so I'll hand back to you, James. So thank you very much to Bertha and to you all for your questions.
Thanks so much, and thanks for both of your contributions there. So we've looked at two of the themes so far, and we have two more to go. Let me just pause for a moment and drop a little pebble into the pool. We keep talking about capacity building, and maybe we just need to remind ourselves for a moment what we mean by capacity building. We keep stumbling over the definitions of capacity building, and I'd like to actually quote Salim Ul-Hook, who's sitting in the front here, and we're going to hear from Salim on our final panel. But you said something the other day, Salim, that I just thought was a fantastic definition of capacity building. I hope I'm not misquoting you. I think you said capacity building is the people understanding the issues, knowing how to respond, and becoming the leaders. I'm just going to drop that in as a pebble to remind ourselves what we're talking about. And as we do that, we'll move on to the third theme, which is transparency in reporting. I don't need to introduce Yamikani because I already have done, but it's been a real pleasure working closely with you over the last few months. Yamikani, you've really driven forward the work of our action group on transparency in reporting. So looking forward to hearing your summary of the conclusions so far of the transparency in reporting group.
Yeah, thank you so much once again, James. It was also indeed a pleasure to work with the UK government presidency team who was leading this initiative, as well as the Wilton Park as the secretariat for the initiative. Indeed, Malawi was there in the forefront as a lead country partner together with Lebanon. Unfortunately, my colleague, Mary, got COVID here while she was here, and she's being isolated in her hotel. So we were really working close together as lead country partners, so we wish her well as she is recovering there. And also we had a esteemed team in our action group. We had ICAT, GHG Management Institute, PATPA, FAO, indeed organizations who really are at the heart of the transparency work. So we had them there, and it was quite interesting conversation. Yeah, so throughout our work, we were answering the questions on how we can provide capacity building for enhanced transparency framework. As we are all aware that the enhanced transparency framework is popularly known as among the rules book, and it is indeed the backbone of Paris Agreement. Indeed, the transparency will provide us a way to know if we are indeed in track to meet the 1.5 degrees goal, and how countries are failing in implementing their actions in country, because it's about reporting actions on adaptation and mitigation, as well as reporting on the financial capacity building and technology transfer needs, as well as the needs and the provided. So it's really an area which requires strong capacity building, because we are talking about data here. being able to collect accurate data and present that data into a report which everyone else should be able to appreciate and indeed understand how each country is doing in terms of its action and support. And in the negotiation room, we are agreeing on reporting as a package because we need a package with capacity building. Countries need to have more and enhanced capacity building. So in terms of recommendation on that, we had several of them. Well, the first one is, as I said earlier on, the government has to demonstrate their willingness to report. It starts with the governments. The governments have to put on structures, put on experts, and indeed the finance to be able to facilitate reporting. So if we have that in countries, then we'll be able to report. The second one is on to provide programmatic approach in capacity building, as mentioned earlier on. We have been having capacity buildings, as said by Andrew and colleagues, targeting individuals, but now we have to institutionalize the capacity building, find a way to sustain this capacity building by taking the programmatic approach as well as whole society approach, not only targeting individuals. We need the universities being able to provide a sustained in-country expertise. We need like trainer of trainers to be able to train experts within the country, not relying on consultants flying in the country to do us the reports, to do the inventory reports, the BTRs and the like. We need in-country expertise to do that. And also the capacity building programs should be widen their scope, as I've mentioned, following the programmatic and whole society approach. So that is basically the key message along all the action groups, where we need to be transformative, not the business as usual way of providing capacity building that we have failed big time, but now with the Paris Agreement, we need to have a new approach of providing the capacity building, and indeed, that's why in the Paris Agreement, for transparency, we are calling the enhanced transparency framework. So we have to enhance the way we provide capacity building. So in summary, that's our recommendations, and we invite colleagues to go deep down and try to lead each one of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Yamikani. I see at least one other member of the Transparency and Reporting Action Group in the audience here, Molly White of the Global Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. Would you mind saying a few words, Molly, about your experience of the group? And I wonder if you might reflect on the relationship between reporting and ambition under the Paris Agreement. Thanks.
Hi, well, yeah, pleasure to say a few words. Thanks, James and Yamikani. Thank you so much for introducing our recommendations to the Catalyst and to the UK COP26 presidency for taking space to elevate transformative capacity building. I can't emphasize that word enough, the transformative. We're not calling for improved capacity building. And Yamikani, I think you, just to quote you right there, I want to emphasize what you said. We've failed miserably. So I do want to emphasize that. And when we talk about transparency for enhanced action, I just want to take that in reverse. Say, what is enhanced action? And it's calling countries to push themselves to continue to push the boundaries of what's in their NDCs. And what does that push need? It needs transparency. And in order to get good transparency where we can really, where individuals, well, everybody in this room has in their own way to do that, what we need is data in those transparency reports that's coherent and not just improved. And in order to get that coherence, we have to work at those capacity levels at every level along the way. So with that, that's my call to action, just as I'm really passionate about it, and it's wonderful to see all of you in the room, and thank you. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Molly. Does anybody have any comment or question in relation to transparency and reporting before we move on? If not, we'll move straight along to the final theme, and that'll give us a bit of time for a discussion at the end. So let's move on to the final one of the 4 action groups, which was carbon market participation. This is in the wrong order now. There we go. Like magic. Thank you to the tech people behind me. I'm pleased to introduce Stefan Hoch, who is the director of the Perspectives Group, which has played a really leading role in developing the Catalyst recommendations on carbon markets. Please, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you so much, James, and thank you for inviting us to the action group and also today to present the key recommendations. So the Carbon Markets Action Group was composed of, as you mentioned, Perspectives, our own organization, but also other important partners like GGGI, the West African Alliance on Carbon Market and Climate Finance, which is also represented here today with our colleagues Mukaila and Usman, the East Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance, the World Bank, the Swiss Click Foundation, and also CCAP. And it was really, I think, a very good mix of, organizations involved already in capacity building, involved in practical piloting of Article 6 activities, and then also, organizations with long-standing expertise involved in the negotiations. From what we understand here in Article 6, in the negotiations, there will be relatively strong language on capacity building. And I think we could expect, actually, as a key output of the COP regarding the topic of carbon markets, that there will be a substantial flagship capacity building program for this topic. So that's why we feel really privileged to have been able to already convene for such a long time and consult with relevant stakeholders in all regions. And just to maybe also say some very quick framing words, I think it's really important to recall that markets are not an end in itself. The objective of establishing carbon markets is really that they are a driver of ambition, that they help us to raise ambition beyond what otherwise would have been possible. And so this is the spirit in which we've been thinking about this topic. And just very briefly, we only have actually a few recommendations, but there's a lot behind those very few words. And what we thought was most important, that's why it is the first one, is that capacity building should not only focus on technical issues, but also really on raising the awareness of benefits of carbon markets to cultivate political will, to ensure that not only do we have some technical experts in the country, but also that the instrument is being considered in national flagship strategies and also systematically into how can we achieve the NDC. So this was very, very important because it is kind of a precondition for effective capacity building. So the second recommendation then, to support national and regional actors to establish and oversee inclusive institutional frameworks for carbon market participation, speaks to the increasing complexity of participation requirements for carbon markets under the Paris Agreement, where we don't just need to think about how do we design a good project, but also how can we do the accounting right to make sure that we're not counting the mitigation outcome twice in 2 NDCs. It's really important that countries have very solid procedures and that we expect as an outcome on how to do that from this COP. But then there's also the linkage that we never had before in the host country with the greenhouse gas inventory, that all of this accounting is done well, that the reporting is done well. This is a very important link also to the work on transparency and reporting that we just heard about. So this is really crucial that we set this up very quickly in a very robust way. On the other hand, also we thought capacity building needs to be delivered in a very pragmatic learning by doing approach, because I think if you now look at the text for Article 6, it can be extremely confusing, and I think even after we've removed all of those brackets, it will still be a rather complex, slightly nerdy topic in some ways. But that shouldn't stop us from starting right away, because even in the early days of Kyoto with the CDM, you know, we didn't know everything, and yesterday, or I think on the last panel we had on the PCCB, somebody was giving the example, Ash Sharma, where he was describing the early experiences of the blind leading the blind, you know, in the very first days, even ahead of the Marrakesh Accords. And we could be in a bit of a similar situation, but that shouldn't stop us from thinking about how can we approach implementation now as quickly as possible. And so that should then go hands in hand with practical activities, with demonstration activities, because what is really needed often only reveals itself once we're getting into the thick of it. So this is very important. Next slide, please. Then number 4, improve knowledge management through broadly accessible knowledge products combined with tailored long-term technical assistance. So I think this is quite important because I think to some extent we were really forced, you know, to draw on a wider range of innovative tools through the pandemic because we couldn't meet anymore as we were used to. And I think that led to a lot of, you know, very frequent meetings sometimes over Zoom, the development of knowledge products that are also accessible through the internet. And that, I think, probably removed some of that, you know, in-person workshop that we were used to. And I think that clearly has benefits. But still, I think it's very important that we still have that, you know, in-person meeting to some extent. And that in particular, that this is focused more on longer-term horizons, not just on events, on workshops, because as you recall, we need to build institutional frameworks. So that is something that needs to evolve, it needs to grow, it needs to establish itself. So I think the tailored aspect, really making sure this fits to the specific country context, is something that needs to be carefully done, and that often then does require more than a Zoom call, but it may need to require that we sit in a room together for 2 days or so around the same table. Then number 5, to ensure that capacity building for participation in international carbon markets is integrated into a comprehensive toolbox for climate action, again, speaks to that we have to think about multiple dimensions of carbon market cooperation. We do need strong, you know, tools for understanding the greenhouse gas dimension, of course, again, how that's linked to inventories, but also what are the sustainable development impacts, for instance, of a carbon market project. This was always an important objective on the political level, in the CDM, for instance, but it didn't get the attention and the relevance that it had deserved, and I think that also had to do with some of the problems we saw. So we need to have a comprehensive look at you know, how we do capacity building beyond just the mitigation outcomes. And then building local and regional carbon market expertise is also very crucial, localizing the expertise in collaboration, for instance, with research institutions, universities, making sure that there isn't just 1 or 2 experts in the country and maybe a service provider that needs to come in even from another continent, but we really need to make sure that the knowledge is anchored in the countries in the region, because if you want this to grow and to get to scale, then it needs to be owned, as you also mentioned with quoting Salim earlier, and only then we can build leadership also from the countries, which helps first of all to identify the right opportunities, but then also to make sure that they are being sustained. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks Stefan. Any quick comments or questions on carbon markets? If not, I'm going to ask you to please thank all of the speakers on the stage. But while we applaud them, we're going to do our final changeover of the day. So I would like to invite, as they leave, the following speakers to come and constitute our final panel: Salimul Hook, Makoto Kato from Japan, if you were in the room, Roberta Jana, and Simon Stumpf from Germany. So, but before we do that, thank you to all of those who have spoken. So, we're going to turn our attention back now to the call to action itself, which really is a distillation of all the recommendations. We've kind of overloaded you with recommendations here, but the idea of the call to action is that it's a kind of a higher level distillation of some of the common themes that Berta was talking about earlier, that we've heard throughout the work of the Catalyst on all these different, in all of these different themes. First of all, to introduce this conversation, we're going to hear a video from Sonam Wangdi, who's the chair of the, as the leader of the Bhutanese delegation, has currently the chair of the LDC group. So let's hear from Sonam Wangdi first of all.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues. It's a great honor for me to be participating at this very important event, which is one of the most important issues for the LDC group. Let me first congratulate the UK government for the launch of COP26 Catalyst Call to Action for Transformational Capacity Building. The past year and a half has undoubtedly been dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has resulted in deaths of close to 5 million people worldwide. The world grappled with disrupted health and education system, heightened food insecurity, and widespread unemployment. At the same time, we have seen the increasing effects of climate change, record-breaking floods, extreme temperature, abnormally heavy rains, more severe droughts, and the wildfires. These unusual climate events took lives, destroyed crops, properties and public infrastructure, and devastated lives and livelihoods. Climate crisis knows no boundaries, and the impacts of climate change are felt across the globe. However, for the 46 LDCs, the crises are further exacerbated due to our limited resources and lack of necessary capacity to undertake climate action. LDCs continue to face significant capacity challenges, undermining our ability to effectively or fully carry out the climate actions we intend to pursue. Capacity building remains one of the key challenges faced by LDCs, both within the walls of climate diplomacy and negotiations, as well as at the ground for effective implementation of climate actions. My group has been calling for sustained capacity support to the LDCs. The way I see it, capacity building should take a two-pronged approach. Firstly, capacity building should happen in the fields of diplomacy and international negotiations. And secondly, strengthening of capacity and capability in implementation of climate actions on the ground. Within the walls of climate negotiation, the LDCs still continue to face challenges due to severe capacity constraints, which undermine our ability to meaningfully engage in the UNFCCC process. We must work towards ensuring that our delegates negotiate on an equal footing with their counterparts from developed countries and secure outcomes that reflect our priorities and national circumstances. On the ground, access to resources dedicated to long-term, holistic, and structured capacity building has been one of the key challenges for the LDCs. The existing financing mechanism does not support building sustained long-term capacity, both at the national and local levels. There is a strong need to build capabilities, systems, and structures and improve the governance of climate decisions with special attention to gender and social transformation. Building local capacity for implementation of climate action will not only reduce the huge burden of transaction costs to the LDCs, but also ensure effectiveness, foster a sense of ownership and empowerment, and build confidence of local communities. The LDCs have enormous potential to raise ambition through market mechanism. However, limited capacity, both in terms of human as well as technology, are factors that restrains our participation. We have been consistently calling out for support in this front. Finally, before I end, I would like to acknowledge and thank the UK government for launching the COP26 Catalyst for Climate Action on Capacity Building initiative, which is the need of the hour, especially for our group. Consistency and assurance of long-term support is critical to build capabilities. I thank you.
And we're so grateful to Honourable Wang Di for that message and for Bhutan's support to the Catalyst process. So I'm going to turn now to Salimul Hook. I think you probably don't need much introduction, but you're the founder and director of ICCAD, the International Centre for Climate Change and Development in Dhaka. You are, I guess, the guru of capacity building established over many decades now in support of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. I'd love to hear from you your reflections on the process and perhaps particularly your reflections on the relationship and strengthening the relationship between capacity building and increased ambition under the Paris Agreement.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for inviting me. Let me start by picking up where the Honourable Chair of the LDC group just left off. The least developed countries group of negotiators started approximately 20 years ago, and I have been associated with them ever since. And I have been running together with my very good friend Benito Muller a program of training negotiators for the last 20 years. And all the senior negotiators in the least developed country have been trained and capacitated over those 20 years. I've been doing this for a very long time. And so we would be very happy to receive more resources to do more of it, but we have been able to do it with the limited resources we've had. The second issue that I would like to share is about capacity building to adapt to the impacts of climate change in those same least developed countries. They are some of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, and as the chair of the LDC group said, lacking in capacity, but the capacity is not zero. It may be low, but it's not zero. And one of the resources that we have, all of us, all the least developed countries, is we all have universities. We have multiple universities. My country, Bangladesh, has more than 100 universities. Now, if you look at where the capacity building money has been spent over the last 10 years, it's gone to northern consultants, and $0 has gone to universities in the south. That was a missed opportunity. And so what we are doing now are organizing universities. In Bangladesh, we have a collection of about 50 of them. We call it Gobeshona. It's a platform that brings the universities together, doing research, building capacity of the entire country. Bangladesh is one of the most capacitated countries on adaptation to climate change, I would argue. But we are also now doing that in other least developed countries. We have a network of universities called the LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change, and focusing particularly on adaptation, and then within adaptation, particularly on locally led adaptation by the most vulnerable communities themselves. And it's a South-South program. It's not particularly well funded. We do human resource development ourselves with our own faculty, our own researchers, our students, all involved in this. And again, we would be very interested in talking to funders who might want to fund us to do the things we want to do, not what the funder wants us to do, because we will not accept funding on the basis of the funder telling us what to do. And there's a lot of money that comes with instructions on how the money has to be spent. We don't take that. The third element I'd like to share and reflect on in the context of where we are right now, in the context of the climate change problem we are facing, which is it's here already, it's happening. We didn't avert it, we didn't stop it, we didn't avoid it. It happens. It's going to happen. It's going to get worse. Unavoidable. In this situation, where is the biggest gap in knowledge and understanding? And I would argue it's the population of the United States of America. And I actually am beginning a program of capacitating the Americans, because they are the ones who are holding us back. Their people need to be capacitated. They're ignorant. They don't know what's happening. All right? Bangladeshis know a hell of a lot more than they do. We don't need your capacity building. Americans need your capacity building. And so I'd invite you to join me in that program. Thank you.
Thanks, Salim. And we always know that that we can rely on you for something provocative, something deeply true and resonant. So thank you for that. So about 10 to 15 minutes from now, we're gonna move to a reception. We're gonna exchange ideas amongst all of us, we hope, about how to move all of this forward over drinks and canapes for those in the room. Before that, let's take a few minutes for anyone in the who would like to speak from the floor for a couple of minutes. Then we're going to take a series of announcements from the countries represented on the stage here. And then we're going to close with some concluding observations, remarks from the UK Presidency. So is there anybody who would like to just respond? Yes, please. Well, particularly if you'd like to respond to Salim or to anything you've heard so far this evening.
I'll let someone else come in first then. I can come in the end.
Okay. I think you're the one, so do please speak.
In Stockholm, and Nancy took me a little bit off guard earlier when she invited me up. I misunderstood. I thought she was asking me to take the panel instead of my chief negotiator, Matthias, which would not have been the best use of your time. But I do not want to leave without saying thank you to the UK. Sweden is happy to endorse the call for action. And to be honest, capacity building is sometimes overlooked, but it is a crucial piece of the puzzle when implementing the Paris Agreement. So very happy to be here. And I also want to say thank you to Wilton Park. James, you don't know me, but I have been sitting in a lot of meetings during this Skype year where you have been moderating and doing a great work. So thank you from the Swedish side. I'm not going to take more of your time. Happy to hear the question to the panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. And it would be an understatement to say that Sweden is punching above its weight all across COP26. You seem to be everywhere, and we're so happy that Sweden has endorsed the call to action and the recommendations. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to announcements then. And I'd like to start with Roberta Iana, who you have two hats really, don't you? You're here on behalf of Italy, but also as co-chair of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. And I'd just like to acknowledge actually the presence in the room of some of the secretariat of the PCCB. I see Alejandro and Ridi over there, and we've been really delighted to have your support and also to be with you in the Capacity Building Hub this week. So Roberta, I don't know if you want to say something on behalf of the PCCB as well as on behalf of Italy, but please do take the floor.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. And yes, as James just said, I'm Roberta Ianna from the Italian Ministry of Ecological Transition and also PCCB co-chair. So on behalf of the PCCB, we already had the chance at the Catalyst for Climate Action on Capacity Building Initiative Day at the Capacity Building Hub to go through the recommendations and welcome them and discuss them, and we'll definitely continue discussing them and the way to take them forward and take this work forward. It is a huge amount of work that the Catalyst Initiative did along this year at the during the climate weeks and in the many consultation calls. So it's work that we will treasure and take forward. On behalf of Italy, I can say, well, Italy has always attached a great importance to capacity building in particular. We are funding donors of CBIT and ICAT initiative, considering that transparency, as it has mentioned already, is really crucial, and capacity building for it is fundamental to allow each party to contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we are funding also a fellowship program at the Secretariat of the UNFCCC to support officers from SEEDs and LDCs to build their capacity around the UNFCCC process and the climate change fight. And let me also support very much what Professor Hook said about universities. Because a very cross-cutting issues also along the four working groups of the Catalyst initiative is youth, and we really need to build capacity of young people to take the fight on climate change to the next level and succeed. It has been like already 2 weeks almost of COP, and youth voices are more and more relevant, more and more present. Italy hosted back-to-back to the pre-COP in Milan a Youth for Climate event, which produced the Youth for Climate Manifesto, and one of the main ask of the young people is about capacity building. And so I definitely agree with what Professor Hook said, that funding need to go also to university to build capacity of young people. And we will, well, my minister actually made the announcement about how to continue the Youth for Climate initiative and to provide capacity building for young people. We still need to figure out exactly how this commitment will be channeled, but definitely there will be capacity building for youth, and we'll take this conversation forward also to the next COP. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. I'll pass straight to Makoto Kato from Japan, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Makoto Kato from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, OECC, on behalf of the Ministry of the Environment, Japan today. First of all, I would like to congratulate the UK Presidency for COP26 Catalyst for climate action. And this is a fantastic moment for all of us, not only from the UK, but also we are the member of this initiative. So I think today is the night where we can also deepen understanding about the capacity building and discuss how we can actually strengthen our joint efforts. Now, I would like to introduce one small recent update about our capacity building activities, especially this actually covers probably transparency, finance, and even carbon market things. We are actually working with the ASEAN countries for the partnership to strengthen transparency for co-innovation, or PASTI, which is consists of bilateral program with countries like Vietnam, Thailand, or Indonesia, but also we are recently starting with our upgraded work with the ASEAN climate change working group. And because for the quantification of greenhouse gases is actually a fundamental thing. So for us to assess for how we can reduce greenhouse gases, how we can mitigate, and how we can actually achieve NDC targets. And then now governments in South Asian countries are trying to develop the domestic reporting, carbon reporting system for the private sector, where they're also trying to join governments or policy from private sectors part. And then we are also trying to bring for their opportunities for accessing, like for example, ESG finance, because they are transparent, and also they are also connected with the global supply chain, where investors actually will see their climate actions. so that while bringing the domestic carbon reporting system as sort of like a mandatory system in future, but also we're trying to have them on board for accessing the ESG finance, and also some of them are actually discussing the carbon market mechanism, actually domestic trading system. So we're happy to work with you, not only with the South Asian countries, but also this regional peer-to-peer learning process can actually inform probably you for future climate change capacity building collaboration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Makoto. And finally, in terms of announcements, Simon Stumpf from Germany, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Simon Stumpf. I'm from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it's a pleasure to be here and provide to you a short statement on behalf of my ministry and the German government. After such an interesting and rich event, a lot of things already have been said, and I can subscribe to almost everything, except one thing James said at the beginning, that capacity building is not for technical rats. I think we do think that capacity building is important, and it's key to reach our climate goals. So before I continue, let me express my gratitude to the UK COP presidency for bringing us together here and for launching the COP Catalyst for Climate Action initiative. And also let me thank you for these really concise and pragmatic recommendations we heard of this evening. So when it comes to climate finance, I think it's crucial to help partners in the developing countries to build up capacities. And why are we doing this? Why do we want to support here? Because we want to enable partner countries to get better access to climate finance and make better use of these funds, to be in a better position to manage these funds. So this is why it's important, and this is why Germany also joined the task force for access to climate finance, which was launched last week here at the COP, and we're really happy to increase our engagement on this process. On adaptation communications, it was also already mentioned, Germany supported the development of the drafting assistance tool for adaptation communications. That tool is publicly available now for those, for all countries who wish to write their adaptation communications. And it's important to keep better track on progress of adaptation to climate change. So therefore, Germany will provide an additional €2.5 million for the NAP Global Network for the development of monitoring and evaluation systems. I guess I also have the hard task to be the last panelist standing between you and the drinks and the canapes, which has been announced. So let me conclude at this point and welcome the great work that has been done by all of you, by all the stakeholders involved into supporting capacity building. And we invite all those who haven't done so yet to join the process and to join the initiative to scale up this important work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. In a moment, I'm going to invite the presidency up just to have the last word, but I just want to say a few words of thanks before that. First of all, thank you to all the many partners in the Catalyst project. I'm not going to list them all because it would take too long, but you can see a list of all of the Catalyst partners on the final page, on the back cover of the call to action. If you haven't downloaded it already, please scan the QR code. I'd also like to extend an invitation from the partners to further countries and additional organizations to endorse these recommendations and this call to action if you would like to. We invite more endorsements. We would like to lengthen the list. And at the download page that you will land on, you will see instructions as to how to add your country's or organization's endorsement to the recommendations. I'd also like to thank the team at Wilton Park that have worked so hard to deliver the Catalyst over the last few months. A few of them are in Glasgow with us: Robin, Nancy, Janine, Tina, who are dotted around the room. But also the team that couldn't join us in Glasgow: Matthew, Jenny, Rachel, Kim, Joe, Abby, many others. Lots of people have worked very hard to make this happen. And finally, I'd like to thank the presidency team, specifically the negotiations team in the presidency. You've helped the Catalyst initiative to be plugged directly into the presidency that's delivering all of this, and I think that has really enhanced it. So I'd like to thank Claire Holzer-Fleming, who's going to come up and speak on behalf of the presidency, and also particularly your colleague Carl McAllendon, who couldn't be with us this evening and is locked in negotiations as we speak. But please, Claire, the final word to you.
Thank you, James. All right. Cool. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for being here. It's, I think, a testament to how many people are here, of PCCB members, capacity building negotiators, donor countries, developing countries, providers. Yeah, it's very encouraging and empowering to see this many people here caring about the COP26 Catalyst. So thank you. I'd like to start with a specific thanks, though, to the COP26 Catalyst partners who have given so much of their time and effort and energy and enthusiasm and insight to really developing the recommendations and making sure that they're as specific and precise as they can be. Thank you, and we couldn't have done it without you. I'd like to row back slightly. So to set the context, when we set out on this journey, let's say, we conducted a series of presidency consultations to really work out how the presidency could be effective within the capacity building space. That involved a lot of consultation with parties, providers, and the message that we continue to hear was loud and clear. Don't duplicate, listen to what is already out there, listen to the experts and everybody who is working in this space already, and work out how you can create a framework to really enable better collaboration and effectiveness within this space, which I hope is what we've done with the capacity building COP26 Catalyst framework. Clearly, we really need, and another thing that we continue to hear was the need to understand the capacity building needs of developing countries in order to better enable and enhance the implementation of the Paris Agreement. On top of that, it's quite a lot of things we heard. On top of that, we also heard we needed to hear what worked well, why it worked well, and how we could best go about doing that. Therefore, that was what I wanted to set the context, and that's what drew out the COP26 Catalyst framework. As you've heard from all the different action groups, they've met throughout the year, they've consulted at all the UN regional climate weeks, and this is what we've come up with. It's very encouraging to see how many people are supporting it. On Tuesday, we held the COP26 Catalyst Day, where a number of partners all led specific events, and there was a lot of very positive conversation throughout that. The 4 key themes that have clearly come out across all of the much more specific recommendations are: 1, we really must pay attention to the long-term perspective and make sure it enhances the local context. 2, thank you, Yamana Kani, for giving us the readout of this. 2, national leadership is absolutely critical, as is a whole of society approach. Number 3, we really, really need to enhance peer-to-peer learning and knowledge exchange, which Salima, you've been promoting for a long time. In particular, I think South-South knowledge exchange and South-North knowledge exchange. It's really resonated how much your stories about the floods, and yeah, we hear you. And 4th, coordination between, at the international level, at the national level, at the local level, between donors, between ensuring that processes are sufficiently streamlined is very, very important. Therefore, please do, as James has said, continue to endorse the recommendations. This is an open call for expressions of interest. It's fantastic to have so many really key people in the room today, so if you would like to continue to be involved or increase your increase your involvement, get in touch, call for how we can take this forward. We also finally, and collaborate, and please, as James said, please do endorse the recommendations. Thank you finally to the PCCB, all of the different capacity building negotiators, etc., who have been engaged in this process. Thank you also to the UNFCCC Secretariat. Shout out Julian, Ridi, Alejandro for all of your support throughout the last year on this, and particularly thank you so much, James, to the whole of the Wilton Park team. You've been fantastic, and again, we could not have done this without you. Finally, thank you so much to the COP26 Catalyst partners. You have been critical in this. Please join us at the reception so we can discuss the announcements that have been made, the recommendations that have been made, and how to take this forward.